book's called Dorchester Ave. It's a novel, and to kind of just synopsize, I'll read what it has in the back here. It says, amid the racial turmoil of Boston's busing crisis, 5 young men are wrestling with their destinies in the cockroach kingdom of Dorchester. As Christmas approaches, they band together to blow their minds and confront fate, or not. Roscoe closed his eyes and tried to will himself out of existence. He'd been working on this for a while. Shut out all thoughts, cruise past the ego, take a right at the id, and keep going till you reach darkness. Roscoe had become adept at getting to that point, but so far he'd always come back. Maybe this would be the time. He awarded bonus points for trying to will himself out of existence on the subway. The rocking of the train had a lullaby effect that was in his favor, but it was more than offset by the noise. Breathing slowly and deeply, he searched for that core of silence. Suddenly he began to lose himself, a fleeting sense of non-being that was something like pure happiness. A change in pressure, like the bursting of a bubble, jolted him back. They were coming out of the tunnel. He squeezed his lids tighter, but it was no use. Awareness came flooding back like a flu. He was on the red line, heading south out of purgatory. When he opened his eyes, the train would be pulling into the flat platform at Columbia, entering Dorchester. The dog. She came to his mind as a thought without image, a formless sense of dependence and accusation. Their relationship was based on some unnamed debt he could never quite repay. Maybe it was because of the name. He had named her Pongo, after the sire in 101 Dalmatians, although she was neither Dalmatian nor male. Pongo, it turned out, would be her last name. Roscoe decided some months into his mastership that her first name was Sydney. Few people knew this, however, and everyone called her Pongo. A nervous dog to begin with, Pongo had been like Gloria Swanson on speed since a second pup was added to the equation on Dorchester Ave. Although Roscoe was not responsible for this, he knew that she blamed him. Roscoe had been worrying a scab on his knuckle since Park Street and picked it off now under his fingernail. Sneaking it into his mouth, he clamped down on the bit of coagulated blood with his front teeth, then relaxed his mandibular muscles so that he could feel the gluing action. The test was to see how long it would hold his jaws together. After approximately 4 seconds, his teeth came apart with an audible click. Using his tongue, Roscoe worked what was left of the scab back to the contact point, but there was never any bite the second time around. Removing the biopsy from his mouth, he slipped it into his jacket pocket. The train wheeled to a halt at Columbia, and a gaggle of BC High boys got on. Roscoe recognized them not so much from the maroon and gold equid jackets, but by the way they acted. There were traces of that pseudo-intellectual banter in the way Raph, Slade, and Fritz interacted. What was the word for it? Fatuous. Roscoe was amused to see a couple of them carrying the double-handled satchels associated with BC High boys and known throughout Dorchester as fag bags. Taking a pencil from his pocket, Roscoe wrote fatuous and fag bags on the back of a grocery store receipt. Fritz denied that he'd ever had a fag bag, but Slade seemed almost nostalgic about his. Slade had once sung the unofficial BC High theme song for Roscoe. BC High, if you can't get a girl, get a BC guy. As the train rolled on towards Savin Hill, one of the boys flicked the hair out of his face with a finger and cried, "Oh, mister," at which another rolled his eyes and said, "You're so jejune." Roscoe crossed out fatuous and wrote jejune. Once the train passed the Globe, the view of Savin Hill Beach opened up, and beyond it, the waters of Dorchester Bay, gray as oblivion. The dog. The dog had come with the apartment in Alston, a one-bedroom efficiency he had budgeted down to the last cent of his earnings at Plasticorp. She was standing in the middle of the room when he opened the door, as if expecting him. She'd apparently been abandoned by the previous tenant, a clown who left no forwarding address. The landlord seemed to feel the dog was Roscoe's problem, not his. This is Raph. He also was one of the 4 who lived in that apartment. Out on the streets, it took a second to get his bearings. Then he was home. Maverick Square was immutable. The subway station sat on its cement island as ever, gateway to the dank underworld that would spit him out in the wonderland of Boston. On his left, a few doors down Chelsea Street, was that other portal to the underworld, Rapino's. Rapino's was where you went in East Boston for one last public appearance before they put you in the ground. Raph's grandfather had been waked there, and his cousin Gloria, who died of a burst appendix in the 4th grade. It was where his father insisted they put him on display when the time came, and where Raph feared with all his soul that he himself would end up in pancake makeup in a bad suit, clutching a rosary with pearly fingers. He crossed the street into the wind. Halfway, he noticed a guy in shirt sleeves standing on the far curb with a styrofoam cup in his hands. He seemed completely unaffected by the cold, and this, more than anything else, revealed him as Giorgio Gugliotta, known more familiarly as Georgie Gugats. Raph had gone to school with him at Our Lady of Mount Carmel from kindergarten through 8th grade, and not once in that time did Georgie Gugats wear an overcoat. Even when the schoolyard was full of snow, it seemed that Georgie Gugats ran around in his shirt sleeves, his maroon tie flapping in the wind, as it was now. More often than not, he was running from the other kids. Georgie Gugats, in the parlance of East Boston, came over on the boat, which is to say, he was born in Italy. For that reason, and because he was dark and spoke with an accent, they called him Georgie Gugats and tormented him mercilessly. Raph, studying even then for martyrdom, had once slowed down during a vicious game of ball tag so that Georgie Gugats could hit him with the ball and cease for a moment being it. That was about the extent of his kindness, though. In fact, he'd done something crueler than pop Georgie Gugats with a rubber ball, and it came back to him now as if it were yesterday. They were in 6th grade, and Sister Mary Gabriel left it up to Raph, the acknowledged brain in the class, to test Georgie in math after school. Georgie had missed 2 tests because he'd had pneumonia, probably from running around with no coat. Raph deliberately chalked 5 tough equations on the blackboard, spiteful fractions that had to be converted to common denominators before they could be added. 1 over 17, plus 3 over 11, plus 6 over 13. Poor, stunned Georgie Gugats, who had trouble enough with 3 times 5, scratched out his confused calculations and looked to Raph for guidance, receiving none. He ended up getting 4 out of 5 wrong, and when Sister Mary Gabriel came back, she took one look at the blackboard and declared that, with a 20% average, Giorgio Gugliotta would get an F in math. Raph, who had no idea his quiz would carry that much weight, had been ashamed. This character is Slate. He's the only one of the guys who has his own apartment. He lives a couple of blocks from Dorchester Ave. And in this scene, his cousin Mickey, he works for his uncle. Mickey is his uncle's son. In this scene, Mickey's come to pick him up for work. They've had coffee, or they've gone to get coffee, and they've backed up and hit the cigarette lady, who was one of the Dorchester characters who continually smokes a cigarette. Mickey jammed the Camaro into reverse. Slate felt a thud. A wave of coffee jumped the rim of his cup and scalded Slate through his jeans. Mickey was already out the door. Slate emerged to find a woman lying on the ground behind the car. "She stepped right in front of me," Mickey said. "You saw it, right?" "For Christ's sakes, Mickey." The cigarette lady's eyes were open, although this suggested only accidental consciousness. Like a dreaming dog, her arms and legs moved as if she were running in place. Beside her on the blacktop, sending up a curl of smoke, was her cigarette. "I think we'd better call an ambulance," said Slate. The woman's lips were indeed moving, but she spoke so quietly that Slate could make out nothing. He found himself thinking that he would be late for work, and that this would cost him money, and that the cup of coffee he'd so looked forward to had gone to waste. The immense regret he felt over his coffee appalled him, and it was shame that finally got him down on his knees to touch the woman's shoulder. "Are you hurt?" Her lips continued to move, but there were no words. Slate realized this was not an attempt at talking, but the smoking reflex. The woman reached out for support. Slate offered a hand, but she brushed it away and retrieved her cigarette. Even as he raised her to a sitting position, she had resumed smoking. Mickey, meanwhile, was inspecting his rear bumper for dents. "Jesus Christ, Mickey!" Exasperated, Slate grasped the woman under the arms and yanked her to her feet. As soon as he released her, she began to wobble. "Angela's cold," she said. "Take me home." Her voice was toneless and without affect. I think we should take her home, Mickey. Take me home, she said. 48 Wells. Mickey, we're taking her home. She lives right around the corner. Take me home, she said. Angela's cold. It's either that or call an ambulance, Slate said. Mickey bent his head and dropped a glob of spit on the street. All right. Slate guided the woman to the Camaro and managed to stuff her in the back seat. Her cigarette had gone out amid all the commotion, but she didn't seem to notice. Mickey said, do me a favor and get rid of that butt. That's leather upholstery back there. If the cigarette lady understood this, she paid it no heed. Swearing, Mickey shot onto Dorchester Ave and banged a hard right on Wells. The car yelped to a halt in front of number 48. This is your stop, he announced. Mickey took his cigarettes from the dashboard, lit a Marlboro, and held the rest of the pack behind his head. The woman's movements quickened as she took the cigarettes. For the first time, Slate thought he saw light in her eyes. Knock yourself out, Mickey said. They got filters and everything. Slate got out first and reached back to help her. The woman shuffled across the sidewalk, still puffing on the dead stub of her Pall Mall. He was considering his duty done when her sneaker caught a crack in the cement sidewalk, and she went down. Again, Slate came to her rescue. Helping her up, he made a cursory check for blood, then took her by the elbow. I think I'd better see her to the door, he said. Mickey snapped the radio on, and Slate found his good deed choreographed to the sound of the Bee Gees wailing, How Deep Is Your Love? A car battery sat leaking acid on the porch. Slate had to push it aside with his foot to get the front door open. Angela's cold, said the cigarette lady. The stench in the hallway made him gag. It was the smell of a place long hidden from the light, a cold stew of mold and rot and nicotine flavored with some mystery essence. The odor, Slate realized, was indistinguishable from the woman. Her gray jacket reeked of cigarettes, and the stink of tobacco oozed from the pores of her skin. Steering her up the stairs from behind, Slate saw more of her than he wanted through a rip in her pants. By the time they reached the second floor landing, he was ready to flee. Angela's cold. Help me. Help me. She made no move to produce a key, but simply turned the doorknob. Slate stepped inside and caught his breath. The hallway was but a hint of the reek that assailed him. Nicotine emanated from the walls like radiation, cutting straight through his sinuses to the pain lobe of his brain. Everything seemed to have a brownish hue. As he reeled, Slate thought he could see shapes moving through the gloom. He was aware of a sound like a ward of sick babies. Cats. They were everywhere, padding across the furniture, sitting on counters, hissing and pawing at each other. One was mewing at him with its eyes glued shut. Another was scratching the bloody stump of a tail against a chair. They flowed across the floor, rubbing the woman's ankles, rubbing his. He staggered backwards towards the door. Don't leave me. The cigarette lady stood in the middle of the room. She did not look at Slate when she spoke, but stared cross-eyed at the tip of the cigarette in her mouth. Don't leave me. The cat with the severed tail batted a red Christmas ornament across the linoleum. Slate took another step back and felt something squish under his heel. A primal instinct told him what it was. He jumped, cried out, looked down. There it was on the floor. Through its snarl, though its snarl was frozen in a death rictus, the cat had not yet achieved rigor mortis. Help me, said the cigarette lady. Angela's cold. Slate swallowed his vomit and fled down the stairs, grateful he had not had breakfast. Steadying himself against the Camaro, he bent at the waist and drank in the cold December air. Mickey rolled the window down and blew a jet of smoke. Do me a favor, Slate told him. Put that thing out. His cousin made a face as he stubbed the butt in the ashtray. I told you, he said, a retard every 10 feet.